Regardless of the warband that you're playing in Mordheim, there is a core tactica. There are 3 points, at least 3 points from my experience, that as much as I want that glory on the tabletop, I need to keep in mind. We need to keep in mind, and this is the starting place. I believe this is a great starting place as we dive into the city of the lost and the damned in a quest together to recover those shards, those weird stone shards in there. So despite the warband you're playing, and there's going to be different layers that get layered over this, the primary thing is keeping your warband alive, survivability, losing a character. And this is what's really interesting about Mordheim. Yes, it's a miniatures-based skirmish game, so there is a component of trying to get in there and wreck as much as you can. But there's also a role-playing narrative in that a lot of the missions that are presented in both the core and the supplements, you're hunting for treasure, you're exploring, you're seeing what other things you can uncover in there. So we need to be mindful of that. And then a final third layer is the fact that it's a campaign-based game. It wants to play campaign. You're going to be leveling up. You're going to be progressing. You're going to be gaining new followers and abilities and items. So that's why the number one thing that we push all the time is warband survivability, even at the expense of the mission. Because once you are 3, 4, 5, 6 games in, you have accumulated enough experience and enough items and enough of the randomness afterwards in the exploration phase that a loss is pretty significant. That's not to say you can't recover, but it can be very significant, especially if you've got, through random acquisitions of items and things, some really, really interesting pieces of equipment and some really interesting opportunities in the city. So survivability, 100%. Second to this is playing the mission and trying to line your pockets with as much weird stone as possible, trying to grab as many shards as you can, as long as it doesn't violate kind of that first rule on there, right? It's like the prime directive. Do not get yourself killed on there. Because even if it's a henchman with just a hand weapon and no armor, you're now faced with a choice. Well, first of all, you're not gaining experience in future games for that henchman. 2, are you going to pay the tax to recruit and crowns another one? That adds up if you lose 2 or 3 over time. And then 3rd, you've lost any potential experience, items, or leveling options on that character. So you can see, even losing 1 can be a big deal on there. And certainly if you lose a minor hero or a major hero, the leader of your warband, a special character, even something that's expendable and can be easily replaced, like a hired sword, it adds up. So as much as we're trying to get that stone, keep the spice flowing, we need to keep our warband up. The third layer, the third piece of this directive is taking out other warbands, is trying to deal a death blow, pun intended, to your opponent on there, so that now they're forced with a choice next turn. Don't replace the losses and suffer those consequences on there, or replace the losses and cut into your loot or your treasure, or have to shift around some items, some gear among warband members, so that new one isn't that weak on there. But that's kind of the third piece, and it's hard in a skirmish-based game. It's hard in a skirmish-based war game, because it is a war game. It's got miniatures, and we're rolling dice, and we're doing tactics, to keep that in mind, where losses I take carry over. Losses my opponent takes carry over. So I need to be hypersensitive, and I have to be hyper-aware to keeping my warband alive. First and primary. Second to that is gathering loot. And third to that is inflicting any losses that I can. It would be better to only get the survival bonus plus 1 XP across your warband and maybe 1 shard. You know, you got lucky. You recovered 1 shard because based on the terrain and movement, the opposing warband just had an advantage in momentum. They were able to take control of key points on the gaming table. That would have been hard for you to break. It would be better to end the game on that with that small, tiny gain. It's still a gain, then risk some pretty big potential losses. That's the primary, that's the code, that's the DNA that is running, in theory, although, look, I go for glory. I try to control myself, but I'm trying to steer you guys in the right direction here. That is what is always running in my mind. Second to that are the individual warbands, their tactica, and we're going to look at those warbands. And then finally, because it is a skirmish game, the mission parameters, the core missions. We're going to be looking at the core missions and then the second release, I think through the Town Crier, a couple of missions on there to explore and some of the key points to gain a lead quickly in those missions.